Good morning to everyone. We are happy to join you on this session where Benoit and myself will talk about AI and how AI is capable to help us in improving the way we interact with customers and in the way we deliver a better customer experience towards the market. My name is Yves Malve. I'm the CCO within Codit, and Benoit next to me is the head of AI within Proximus Data. Within my role, I will give a short intro, and I will also do the outro, and Benoit will more focus on the real content of this presentation. So I would propose that we get started. What is important in a start is asking yourself why AI would matter in the context of customer experience, and that's a very important question. I would like to make a reflection on a topic that's living for every company, and that's a topic that we are calling a customer journey. What do we see today is that a lot of customers think by themselves how we can optimize the way we order our process from order to cash. And we see in reality that the order to cash is not enough today. Before the order, you need a brand awareness. And after the cash, you would like to have customers who can act as an advocate for your brand itself. In this context, we see a lot of companies investing in new applications, investing in contact center solutions. But part of that, they will also recognize that a lot of manual work is still in the full process of a customer journey. We are in a momentum where AI is everywhere, and customers see that AI is an important asset where automation can be done in the full stack of the process within a company. And that's a bit the point that we would like to tackle today in the first story. I already mentioned that AI is an important asset in enhancing the customer experience. And what we see today in official reports, and this is also something we see when having chats with our customers, is that we see that a lot of initiatives have been started to do proof of concepts. Those proof of concept needs to prove value. It's a momentum to try new technologies with AI and to see if it can bring extra value for the company. And in the official reports, we see that most of them are not capable to show real ROI. In parallel, we also see that a lot of executives recognize that AI will remain in the company, and that they recognize AI as a real, let's say, catalysator in the way a company needs to grow. So it means that in those two parallels, in those two figures, you have the paradox that the executives recognize the importance of AI, and from the other hand, we see a lot of companies are not capable to show that real ROI. We had, let's say, the same battle within Proximus, and we've put a governance in place allowing us to get a higher success rate than that 5% that we see in the market benchmarks. What is that framework? First of all, we started by a higher management by recognizing AI as an important asset within our proper corporate strategy. Our strategy is called Amplify, and if you look to an amplifier, you put input and you get more output of it. Well, we see AI as the amplifier, allowing us to reach better and in a more performant way the journey towards our corporate KPIs. So that top-down approach was a very important one. The second step that we did is we organized ourselves in an organization where we also have a very strong bottom-up approach, and you will see that the bottom-up approach allows you to get ideas from the business. And it is important that ideas from the business comes up to an AI board, and that the top-down approach allows you to focus on those use cases that can deliver value for the corporate KPIs and for those milestones that are really relevant for you as a company. In the third bullet, and Benoit will explain that later on in the presentation, but we also think in portfolios. And what does it mean is if we look towards let's say the key competences within Proximus, and our network is one of that. Our consumer market is an example of that. The B2B market is an example of that. We really focus on the use cases that can bring value in those core pillars for the companies. And the big advantage is that it gives you focus in the way you develop and in the way you bring ideas into concrete value for the company. Yeah. And in the fourth pillar, and that's directly related towards the MIT report, which shows a success rate of 5%, and we really measure every use case deployed in our company based upon the output that it gives for the company. And it means that every AI model is measured in output in terms of a CO2 reduction, for example, NPS increase, a CSAT increase, typically parameters that are directly related towards customer experience. Yeah. And the last pillar, also important one, is if you look towards the technical concept of artificial intelligence, it's very strongly related into your data stack. So it means that a lot of companies, including ourselves, really need the foundation allowing you to have good data, structured data, governed data, but also that you think in terms of security and compliancy, allowing you to have good models that outperform in the way you get value out of your AI. Yeah. I would like to make it a little bit concrete because it can look a bit of a theory. But what you see in this slide is, let's say, the game a bit between the top-down approach and our bottom-up. So on the left side, you see the amplified strategy where AI is embedded in as an accelerator towards the KPIs. At the right side, you see the fact that we think in a portfolio, and at the bottom you see a few use cases that are measured in terms of KPIs that can be related towards the corporate strategy. What is important? Every let's say output of a KPI measured in the ROI model can be translated in euros. If you increase, for example, the CSAT or the NPS outputs of your customer interaction organization, for example, that can be turned into euros. The CO2 reduction can be reduced in euros. Yeah, and if we look towards the net value for Proximus, our, let's say, 200 plus use cases that have been deployed within the organizations bring already more than 50 million euros per year for our company. Yeah, and this is where Benoit's story starts in explaining a bit more into the details. What use cases that we deployed for the customer interaction, and how we did it, and how we made this journey a success within the company.
Indeed, thank you, Yves, for that nice introduction. So now allow me to zoom on some specific use cases and how also we measure and get that ROI that you just mentioned. But as you explain, even if I will be focusing for today on the customer interaction domain, AI is used everywhere. It's part of our daily life, also in the company. You can see here a few examples of other kind of use cases and projects that we are doing within Proximus, being on the operations, marketing, sales, logistics, also on the support functions like HR, finance, and the important also IT and network for our business. But if I focus more on the specific customer interaction and the customer experience domain, we can split it into four main areas. Well, there might be more, but I will focus on four for today. The first one, self-service, is becoming very crucial for the customer because they always want things to be up. They want to be able to do things by themselves. They don't want to be blocked, to have to wait. We are living in a world which is accelerating, and there AI can also play a big role in the automation behind the scene to allow that self-service. A second thing which is important is whenever the self-service is not sufficient and when you need to go further, then still when you are leveraging also your employees, your agents for the customer interaction, allowing to have a smart routing engine that will make sure that the requests from the customers are ending up with the right people to handle those. That's what we call the smart routing, and again, AI can play a big role there. Then once it reached the person, the employee, that will then handle the request because the previous steps were not sufficient. Also, your agents, your human agents, you can enhance them, you can give them and equip them with tools involving AI or not, to also make sure that they become more efficient for handling those requests that are coming to them. And last but not least, sometimes that's also something that might be a bit overlooked when we think about customer interaction, but the analytics. So what happened after all the interactions with the customer also contain gold information that should be exploited to analyze and to understand what are the common problems, root cause, why we are contacted, and how those interactions are going. That's also something very important where AI can help a lot. For me, I always get the question: is the goal of AI to replace humans? And so, isn't it a bit sad? My answer to that is I don't see it that way, and especially in the customer interaction, where I'm convinced that the human place is very important. So I would rather position AI in front of human for some tasks indeed that can help also to reduce the volumes, for example, of requests, but at the same time to position it beside the human, next to the human, to also enhance them and also improve the employee experience, as you mentioned, Yves, because that's also very important. And as humans, we have qualities like the empathy, the judgment, and the ability to also adapt and deal with unseen and complex problem situations where an AI might not be capable of. If we go on an ideal view of how customer interaction happens, so there are several steps, and I simplified it here quite a lot. But it all starts on the top left with like a first question, a first request from a customer. That is usually processed via some platforms. You have then some also intent detection that can be used. That's a smart routing I was referring to. And sometimes still the predefined flows that you might already have set up for many years, they can prove to be useful because sometimes we also need some deterministic flows, while AI, as you know, it's all based on statistics, and there is always like a part which is, yes, it can create mistakes, well, like any human after all. But so those predefined flows, very important to keep them when it makes sense. When it's not sufficient, or when we want to go one step further and really also understand what the customer wants, I mean, it's a bit more complex, we can go with, and that's what we call our digital assistant, which is a solution involving AI. It's typically a RAG for the ones which are more expert in the audience. So that's an assistant that will be based on some knowledge. It can include FAQs, website information, internal documentation processes, and so on and so forth, and will be able already to analyze what's the question and provide an answer in an automated way. And that way you see the arrow, which is a communication. So it's not just giving one answer, it's also continuing the dialogue until the customer is happy. If that's not the case, then we will have to have a mechanism to fall back to a human. And that's the last arrow. You see, human agent can also take over when the situation is very complex. And there, what we did is to equip them with some important tools that will also ease their life quite a lot, so that they can still continue the interaction in the best way. And that will be a second zoom that we will do in the next slide. And last but not least, the interaction analytics, which is based on those raw transcripts that you get out of those interactions. Very important also for the continuation in case the discussion could not be finalized, because maybe there is still something that needs to be investigated further down. And so interaction will have to continue afterwards. Then it's important to keep notes of that and to avoid the situation where, as a customer, you have always to re-explain your case because it's another person or another agent or another system. And that's pretty tiring and annoying for customer experience. So now what I will do in the next slide, we will zoom on those three components. So as you can see here in the flow, and tell you a bit more what we have done and put in place there. So if we go for the digital assistant, so basically in the past, what a lot of companies, also including us, had put in place in the past years was to have a way for the customer to decide if they want to call and to be in contact with humans, send mails and so on, or to go via more digital channels. Those digital service solutions are now enhanced via AI, but in the past that could have been those predeterministic flows that I mentioned about. And at that time already, if those flows were not sufficient and we need to fall back to a human, that was a possibility. Now, with the rise of generative AI and those large language models, which are also much easier to use and to understand the language behind the scene, we have put in place an AI component, which can also help to capture the intent and then decide already if we notice that the customer asks explicitly from the start, for example, to be in touch with a human. That can happen. That obviously the goal is to satisfy the customer and see how to put in contact with the available call agents. But at the same time, some people just want their problem to be fixed fast, sometimes 24/7. So when also call centers are not open, and there for the easy or low value questions, definitely that's something which can be handled quite nicely, and we have also statistics about that by that digital assistant. Also, we realize that in some cases it's a very complex situation, and there either then you can say, well, we still want to handle it in an automated way via the digital assistant, but I'm convinced that it's much better that your system can also realize when it's not going well and then fall back and propose to put the customer in contact with the right sales agent or the right team if it's, for example, a troubleshooting question. So being efficient in that split, in that routing is also very important, and not just stick to one of those. I think that will avoid quite some frustration from your customers. The second part, which was really on the tooling, I will zoom on one which we call Maya. Maya stands for My AI Assistant. The nice thing is, in fact, it's the same acronym in 3 languages in Belgium. So I guess a few companies might also use the same name. On our side, so that's a solution we developed. We started the development 2 months after ChatGPT went out. Was a big boom, and it was deployed to production and started to be used by the community in end of 2024, just for reference. The business context was the following. The Proximus internal knowledge base that the sales agents have to use to be able to provide the answers to the customers is rather big, and also is evolving constantly. And it's really daily updates of content. It's thousands of pages of content. As a sales agent, obviously you can every day have a look at the news, study a bit the news to be sure that you have the latest news to tell to your customer the day after. But it's also exhausting, and it's not always feasible. So if we think obviously of the users that are using this tool, we have our call centers agent on the phone, both internal and external, also the shops agents, which are already physically in front of the customers, but also some partners which are reselling Proximus services like telco services. They don't know us as well as our internal, for example, employees. And so it's very interesting for them to have a tool that will help so that they don't have to study all the time to be able to provide the right piece of information at the right moment. And also we realize that the technicians, and in our case, when we go for providing a new service or to make a repair of an installation, often the customer also asks them additional question, not linked to the troubleshooting, but more to like, okay, I have this contract, but what I miss maybe a bit of data. What next contract could I have? How much would that cost? And all those more sales questions. But as technicians, normally, and in the past, what they said was, yeah, sorry, but that's not really my domain. And then I advise you to contact this number, and then you can get in touch with a call agent. But now, because they also have access to the tool, they can simply use it to provide still a piece of information. And even if they are not the expert, at least the customer already gets something and that does not have to take another action. So also in terms of customer experience, nicer. And for the employee experience, they really say, and I will go into some metrics right now, that it was a very nice story, in fact, because a lot of users adopt it quite easily. That's often a question. When you start building a solution with AI, you might have the concern first, okay, will it work? Will it bring benefits? And all that is also linked to, will it be used as we expected? And that adoption factor is sometimes something that can also hinder a lot the the success of an AI project. And here, what we saw was we were a bit surprised, to be honest, so because we were foreseeing a plan in terms of change management, adoption, etc., etc. But we realized that the adoption went by itself. And what I mean by itself, it was promoted by the first users that got, in fact, involved in the project. And that's maybe also a key to the success of this project is we made sure that during the development, not the early phase, but when it began to become a bit more concrete and we had something to test, we also involved a few people from the community that will use the tool in the end, the target community. And that way, they could also feel part of the project. They help to design and to improve it, to make it more efficient and suitable for usage by their peers in the shops or in the call centers. And that's probably also what explained that the adoption went easily. If you look at the top metrics here, for example, that give you a bit of an idea of how much it's used. So a bit more than 5,000 questions a day. That means that since we put it in production, it's around a bit less than 2 million of requests that has been processed there. Quality is quite high. Remember, it's still an AI behind the scenes, so AI is never perfect. So if you hope to get the 100%, that's a bit optimistic. 85 is pretty good. And if you see also the recommendation, so people among themselves, they recommend to 98% the tool to their peers. That's also very important as a metric to measure, because that means they really see it as an added value for their job. And when we send surveys to also collect a bit more information why they like it, but those 6,000 users, what they say is that it helps them in 60% of the case to better concentrate, in fact, on the problem, on the question that they get from the customer. They can also feel more confident, and also the technician, because usually in the past he would have said, I don't know, sorry, and then okay, it's a bit your image when you go to the customer. Now they can also answer, so they feel more confident to help, and they feel also better than in their job for 72%. And on the ROI part, because I was not explaining it too much, but what we are also monitoring or kind of following up in terms of statistics is, okay, after interactions, how many additional calls is there? Like the second lines, for example. And we see that when they are in contact with an agent that was using the Maya tool, for example, here, there is much less second lines. So you see almost 60%. And that can also represent quite some benefits. Also, a lot less tickets, tickets for troubleshooting or investigation case, 20% less. And all that, in fact, is a virtuous circle. Because if you have less second calls, if you have less rework, you have also more time to spend on the new request that comes and to solve those requests ASAP. And so you don't create for the customer that they have to wait too long or that is not treated or they have to go several times with different people. So I think that's pretty important to keep that in mind. And as I will come back also in the next part, one of the key success was to embed those people from the field in the development of the project, and also making sure that you solve a pain point, not that you just come because if AI is interesting, it's a hype, you want to have it. That might be not the right way to start those AI use cases. And then I will conclude this zoom on use cases with the third one. So interaction analytics, as I already briefly explained, what does it mean? It means making sure that we can also follow up on all those interactions that are happening every day. If it's an interaction that goes via text, via an SMS, via mail, application, chat, whatsoever, that's already easier to process because the text already there somehow. If it's a voice conversation by a call, then you need also to pre-process to make sure that you can also analyze it with the same tools and the speech-to-text technologies which will allow that. Also note, I will not enter the whole detail here because that's not the topic of today, but regulation, it's also important to keep them into account. And storing all those conversations is also, as you can imagine, highly sensitive data, so we are not allowed. So we have also to make sure that it's aggregated sufficiently to not keep all the specific and sensitive personal details of the conversations. Just side note. On the interaction, what can we do? Well, first, detecting a bit the topic. Contact reasons, as we call it. That's also one of the use cases that is currently running, and you see a bit in terms of the volume. So 35,000 interactions are scored every day. Scored in, it's more labeled, let's say. That means we analyze that transcript, and then we store only a few parts, which includes, for example, the contact reason, which is also summarized. We have a specific way to do it because, as you can imagine, there might be a lot of reasons for a customer to contact us or you. And what we did is having a 3-level classification, like a first level, which is very generic. You can imagine if it's a finance question, a contract question, or other kind of questions. A second level, which is already more specific in that category, and a third one, which is then pinpointing normally to the real problem that the customer had. And that helps us then to also run some analytics, because you see the volume, we have a lot. And then we can also follow it over time and check if the contact reasons for which the customer are calling or contacting us change over time. Is it always the same reasons, or suddenly is it a new reason, maybe explainable by some other factors that we know or that we don't know, but at least then we have the information proactively and we can react faster. Another use case that we can imagine based on those transcripts is what we call insights. And that's also understanding how we can improve the processes in the future. Based on all those interactions and the way that they were kind of solved, if we think, for example, about the troubleshooting. Coaching, which is also a quite sensitive one from a regulatory point of view, but it can also be helpful to understand how the best conversation and where we get a customer the most happy after the interaction, how that can be used also as a role model and put in trainings, for example, internally, to make sure that we base ourselves not just on what we think a customer appreciate in the interaction, but really on what happened in real life. And the last example, which I will cover with another slide, is what we call the memo. And the memo is kind of the summarization of the interaction in the context of making sure that if there is a follow-up which is needed, that we don't start from scratch. That was the example I told you, which is very annoying if you have to call several times, every time another person, and they don't know. There is no follow-up. You have to start again and again and again. Super frustrating. So here we have put in place that interaction memo use case, which is also based, as was explained on the transcript, and then making sure that we use some large language models which are fine-tuned also to our context as a telco and Proximus, and then summarize that information also in a specific way. Because you might know, maybe you are also facing that challenge, but knowledge management is a big thing. So a lot of companies have data. I would still differentiate data and information. My definition of data, you can think it about the raw data, which is also in tabular or whatsoever. Information is something which usually is produced by the employees, like it can be the processes, the description of some tools. It's a bit sometimes the metadata as well. And all those information are becoming critical in these days when we want to create those assistants via large language models, because they need to have the information somewhere. And if your processes are not documented, for example, or not in the right, in optimal format, that will also at some point be less efficient for your AI system to process those. And so here, when we summarize those conversations for future use by another agent and to keep a good follow-up with the customer, we have those 4 core elements which are described here, and we always stick to the same way of summarizing or organizing that data, so that afterwards we have another use case that can take that information and do even more automation, for example, or analysis, reporting, and so on and so forth, so that it's not always in a different kind of format, which is more difficult to handle. Voilà, so that was for me to tell you some concrete initiatives. Obviously, as Yves mentioned, we have 200 plus use cases that we started over the past 10 years. So there are much more than what I told you, but I think it gives you already kind of the big topics that could be also tackled on your side. And now for the last part of this webinar, I think one of the questions you might have is, okay, but how do we get started? How do we get to the value which AI is promised to everyone? And I agree, because you might wonder, okay, those use cases that I just showed, how long does it take? And is it a lot of effort? What was the investment you have to go? Did you make a lot of trials that have to go back and so on and so forth? My answer is, if I relate it indeed to the study that from the MIT that you mentioned, Yves, a lot, and sometimes we observe that a lot of companies are struggling with going from the POC, proof of concept, or prototype towards the industrialization. As you already said, without giving a figure, at Proximus, only 30% failed compared to the 90% related in the study. So I think we are nicely positioned. That was nice also to see, and I was a bit surprised, to be honest, when I read first last year the MIT survey. But I can relate to it. It's also something that you have to build. And as I said, it's not that we exist for 1-2 years in terms of AI focus. So it already originated with the first use case in production 10 years ago. So we have also learned along the way and adapt our governance and our way of tackling and developing projects as such. And my goal in this section is a bit to share those evolution, the lessons that we learned over the past years, so that you can already keep that into consideration from the start. So to me, the most frequent failures, reason that we saw and that we observe on our side was sometimes a lack of consideration when it comes to integration. Why is so? Because sometimes you want to do the box as an innovation track, so which is a bit outside of your existing governance for IT projects, for example, but then you don't consider always the end state. You're just focusing on, will it work? Because there is a lot of skepticism sometimes on the AI part itself. Everyone knows, yeah, it's never 100% correct, but then will that be useful? Will that be good? And so we focus often the effort only on that, while we should already think a bit bigger and have that end state in mind to be sure that what we will be building doesn't have to be completely rebuilt for making it to production. A second thing is, and that was also said, so I will go quickly on that side, but the hype. Don't focus on the hype. Don't do agentic AI because everyone talks about agentic AI. I mean, do it and think about it if it makes sense. Scope it also. Make sure that you have a clear problem, a pain point that you start from, so a business problem, and where you say, oh, I think we can be more optimized. And there start the reflection on how and what kind of AI or non-AI you can put in place to improve that process. As I said, sometimes the innovation can also reside in different teams. I don't know on your side, but it can be part of a strategy department, it can be part of an IT department, or it can be embedded in the business department. The thing for me, in my experience, is it's all the best when those innovative ideas are directly connected with business processes and problems, not just for the sake of using technology because it's cool and nice to do it and follow the hype. Governance and data governance, AI governance, very important. I mentioned AI is all about statistics. What it means, statistics is all about data. If you don't have the right data, or if you have wrong data or non-representative data, well, you will make inference, you will take conclusions, and the model will also take conclusions based on something which is not the reality. And then indeed, you will end up in a situation where your POC might be not successful. And then you will blame the AI, while in fact, you have sometimes to look a bit at the foundation layer, and data is a critical one there, making sure that data is available, accessible, but also of sufficient quality to be leveraged and to get information out of it. Something which is also sometimes overlooked is the security aspect. Why? Because when it's innovation, you will think, okay, again, that doesn't have to follow all the process of security, otherwise it will be blocked, that will not go fast, and so on. Yes and no. Why? Because at some point you might still hit a wall. If you completely neglect the security aspect and then you want to implement and integrate it in existing processes, you will face security at some point. And so better to already know a bit upfront what are the potential risks linked to that, so that you can also in design of your POC to take those into consideration and also prove that security-wise, for example, that's totally legitimate. And lastly, I also want to give a few words on ethics and compliance adoption. Well, ethics and compliance is also evolving quite a lot these days with the EU AI Act, which also enforces now all companies to spend, at least have the reflection on what is the risk for human beings of developing some kind of AI, There are some which are completely forbidden in EU, and that's the worst cases. And for others, they can be high risk, low risk, mitigated risk. And depending on that risk level, then you have a certain obligation that you also need to keep into account. My point is also when you do POCs, don't do a POC where you know in the end anyway it will be blocked. I mean, if you want to do a POC, for example, to infer emotions so that you can trick people and play with them, that's definitely something which will be forbidden by AI Act. So, I mean, frame it and scope it differently so that it also respects us as human in the end. If I have to summarize all those, I would say that the problems comes from the fact that those POCs, they follow sometimes another process of than the conventional projects, and so they are not done in a production environment. They are done in another environment, which can be also provided by an external vendor. But obviously, when you go in their environment, yes, things might work. I mean, it's self-contained. It's usually on a subset of data. You have a lot of constraint that you remove, and you just want to prove that AI is working. But for me, that's not the most important point. You need to prove that there is value and that also your organization is ready to adopt it. And for me, then we come back to the famous people, process, tool, and so on. Don't just focus on the tool aspect and the technology aspect. Also think about, is your process ready to absorb it? And are the people also willing to? And if not, also don't forget to do that in parallel, not just focusing on the technology. Then, if we go to specific tips and practical lessons learned, you can see here a few. I will not cover all of them, but basically it all comes down to making sure that when you develop, you have also the right people in that core team. People from different backgrounds, not only the tech, the IT, the AI engineers, but also people representing the business, the field operation, what's happening really, because they can bring you valuable insights that otherwise you might overlook. And then again, at the end of the POC might be successful, but then you will realize when you go to production, okay, a lot of things were not considered in the end. That's linked also to start with the end in mind. That might look a bit difficult, but it's very important. Think big, start small, and don't forget what the end goal is. End goal is not to have a tool which is super fancy and that you can tell at the end we develop X agentic AI use case, but really the value that's behind. And that's where you also need to plan the project, to have a roadmap, a vision, where you want to go and where you want to invest, and also where you will invest a bit less, and ensure you have the buy-in from the hierarchy, because they should also be a good stakeholder and support those initiatives. Otherwise, it might just be that, okay, there is a small budget for a POC, and then nothing else. And then, okay, even if POC is okay and it's successful, well, it was not foreseen at a bigger level, and then you might wait an additional budget review cycle to get it implemented. And by that time, technology evolved quite fast. Sometimes it might be too late if it's 1 year after. So keep that into account and make sure that you also have measurable objectives to base your conclusion of the POC on tangible things, not just on feelings sometimes. I was mentioning the foundations. So those foundations, and that's also where, as Proximus NXT, and together with my colleague at Codit, we are helping a lot, and we are making sure that companies can be ready for getting the benefits, in fact, from AI. So for me, if you expect the value to happen, it will really scale that value if you have those foundations in place. And what I mean by foundation is a few things. The infrastructure, I mean, you need to be able to run those workloads, obviously, and it can be on your premises, it can be in a sovereign setup or in the public cloud setup. Data availability and quality, we already discussed that, making sure also that it's quite centralized and accessible, because data silos sometimes is important for security reasons, so it's always a balance, but having also data which is easily connected, that's where the magic really can happen via AI, when you make the links between several also processes and sources of data. The governance, nowadays, it's very easy for everyone to use AI. It's everywhere, in your phone and on your laptop, everywhere. The thing is, if it's not governed, the previous shadow IT that we talked about, now it's becoming shadow AI, and the speed at which it evolves, it's even bigger than before. And so that's also a huge risk. It represents a lot of risk for companies. So also think and make sure that you take a bit of time to govern your AI, your evolution, and your strategy in a proper way. security and doing things responsibly, also making sure that what you develop follows compliance and regulation, and making sure that you have good content quality and structure. That's coming back to the information and knowledge management that I mentioned. For me, my personal opinion is if you go without those strong foundation, you can get some short-term benefits, what possible, but at some point that will just amplify the problems that you already have today, because AI will just do it at another scale, kind of. So it will not fix it in the end and on the long term, but more amplify those. Before coming to the end of this webinar, I just also want to give a few words on the methodology and life cycle that we have. You will see it's nothing extraordinary. I mean, probably if you're familiar with Crisp DM or other methodology, it's very similar. The thing is, you need to play that life cycle kind of well. And in the intake, as I said, is not just looking at the business case, but also challenging sometimes the business case, making sure you consider the employee experience, the customer experience, etc., on top of what is more easily, let's say, computable, but also that you think big and integration, what would look like the target architecture if everything would go as you expect. In the exploration, that's also very important. Why? Because AI still is a bit statistics, so you need to try and to check if the data answers your needs. And for that, you need to do experiments. There is no magic formula telling you, yes, it will work or not, just you need to test and explore. And that's what we do with what we call MVP. So for minimum viable product, we design and implement a solution which is already viable from a ROI perspective on a small portion of the population, to test it in real life condition as well. Remember, making sure you do it also in a similar to prod environment. Then obviously you can go to industrialize once the MVP proves the real value in a concrete case. Then you have to consider and making sure that all the security that you foresaw in the intake and exploration, that now you put it in place and extend it so that the full population is covered. And then an important one is to keep in mind that it never ends, an AI project. You have always first to monitor, to track, but also to improve. Technology evolves. Nowadays with those LLMs, they also have like an end date. Sometimes they are not supported anymore if you didn't build your own. And so all that LLM ops and so on, it's also something very important. And at some point, and we saw that in the past a lot, a use case at some point is less useful because process change, but then you go back to an intake and then you revamp the use case to make it also more suited to the current situation. So for me, it never ends. In fact, when you deploy it, it's also a new beginning for potential next value to create and next impact. So a bit as a conclusion, so start small and expand. Start from the business, not from the technology. Make sure that you understand the needs and the pains. That can also help you to assess if you should buy a solution or build it. In both cases, make sure you have the right experts, both for your side and for the partners if you go with. Move forward with agility. Keep things also simple. Don't over-engineer. Don't go too far because you think, okay, it's cool. I mean, simplicity always wins when it brings the value and the impact that you are expecting, and ensure that you have that follow-up and good measurement points also on what it really brings. Because having a good governance is also being able to say stop and to say we kill it, we cancel a project at any stage of the phase. It doesn't have only to be after the POC, it can be after a few years running in production, and there is no point of keeping it if it doesn't bring any value. And so to conclude, just two things from my side. I would say that the question is not, can we do it with AI? And should we prove with a POC that we can do it with AI? I think we need to go a bit beyond that and really ask ourselves, will that create the value that we expect? And then is it worth the investment that we can put in place? Because if you don't really clearly have those expectations and that you don't reflect on the value, for me, the project will, if in fact, be a failure even before you start working on it.
Thank you, Benoit, for those insights. I also remember from your speech that AI is certainly there to help us and the companies in Belgium in the journey around the customer experience. But I also believe that AI is there to help enhance the employee experience. And for me, the combination of employee experience and customer experience is really the foundation for sustainable growth. And that's what the companies are striving for in their proper future. Before going towards the questions, I would like to thank everybody who joined this webinar. You will see this link to submit the form giving feedback on this webinar. It is also a link which allows you to ask questions if you would have questions after the webinar. So thanks again to everybody.
Proximus NXT. Tech Biz People.